Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Herskowitz. I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of the Ashland Independent Film Festival. And we are back with the son of the director of the film you just saw, The Murder of Fred Hampton. And I'd just like to start and ask you, Jesse, about Howard Alk, who he was. Just give us a kind of a brief bio of this fascinating filmmaker.
Yeah, it's a complicated story. My father was he was first of all, he was in this accelerated program the University of Chicago had at the time that he went to University of Chicago at 14 or 16 years old, and was part of this intellectual Chicago elite, group of people. While he was there, or soon after, he founded the Second City, which is the famous comedy club in Chicago. He was part of the original cast and director, and they did eventually take it to Broadway. He sold that. Out of that, he's one of the three founders of that club, and then he opened a folk club called The Bear in Chicago, which I believe is where he met Bob Dylan, and it was kind of a den of iniquity at the time, and got raided by the police a few times, and it folded, and he ended up traveling around with Bob for the 65 and 66 tours. He was actually the person who brought Don't Look Back to Pennybaker at the behest of Albert Grossman, Bob's manager. They actually brought the film to Richard. I talked to Richard Leacock, and they actually brought the film to Richard Leacock first, and he turned it down, and then they gave it to Pennybaker, who's his partner. But then he made some films. He was also an editor at this time. He'd edited a film called The Cry of Jazz and other films, and he with this film, Hampton, he was tired of editing other people's films. He had this opportunity to go to Chicago and make some films with the Panthers. And
okay, before we get to that, your father was involved in Dylan's Rinaldo and Clara too, correct?
Yeah, so that was after this film. After this film, he was in Canada editing a film on Janis Joplin called Janis, and he got called up by Bob again. They'd been sort of separated from him, had a falling out, I believe. I don't know, but and then at the drop of a hat, we moved down to Bob's property in Malibu, and he started working on Rinaldo and Clara. He's one of the two main cameramen on Rinaldo and Clara, and then they edited that film in my basement when I was growing up, which was this, impossible to see now, but it was kind of a disastrous film. Played at Director's Fortnight, was kind of savage, and all that footage has now been used in the new Scorsese film, reimagined.
Okay, so I just could say, just tell a quick story that I met your father when I was in college, and I was a student in the film program where Nicholas Ray taught, and one day Nicholas Ray had us all come. There was a big event at the Harper College auditorium where Dennis Hopper was going to come and show us a rough cut of the last movie, which he had been making in Peru. And Hopper came out and said that he didn't have the last movie. Of course, it took him forever to finish that film. But he was bringing this film that he was involved with and he was very excited about. And then he brought out your dad and they showed The Murder of Fred Hampton. I think it was one of the first times it ever got shown. And it made a huge impression on me. So I'm thrilled to that we had the opportunity to show this, as well as your own film, which we'll mention at the end, Pariah Dog. So Jesse, tell us more about the murder of Fred Hampton, how it came about, because you've done some kind of research into the film, or you've learned something about it.
Yeah, my father, he got a call from Mike Gray, who was the sort of producer. It's hard to say what people did on the film because they made it as a collective, really, But Mike Gray was roughly the producer of the film. He called him to make a film at the Democratic National Convention. Because he'd been there and he'd shot all this footage of the police riot in '68 at convention and he wanted to make a film. My father had already made a film about that, but he came and sort of hijacked it and said, we're going to make a film about the Panthers. And they made this film called American Revolution 2. And which is a great film. I think, very interesting film, and a lot of that footage has been repurposed lately. Then I think in the process of making that film, they met Chairman Fred. And as you can see in the film, like, he's an incredibly dynamic person. I think had a future as one of the great leaders of his time. You see the way he speaks, how sharp he is. He's so intelligent and so quick. And I think one of the things that I've heard, that they feel like maybe why he was such a threat is that he was pretty inclusive. There's a scene, I think it's in the film, I haven't seen it in a while, where he says, all power to black people, and then he says, all power to white people, all power to all people, and that's pretty radical at the time, in that group and in that scene. And I think that's pretty threatening, because they were making it class-based.
Yeah.
And so
really, I mean, I gather this started out as a portrait of Fred Hampton, and you get that for the first half of the film, but then it turned into something else. And his murder happened in the course of making this film, correct? Could you tell us a little bit about how your father responded to that?
It's a strange film, right? Because it starts with one thing and completely changes into something else. And they were making this film about Fred. They'd shot films, the scene like the courtroom scene and other scenes, and then he was murdered. And I think they called. There's a scene in the film where you see them prepping for a potential raid that's coming, right?
Yeah.
And I remember I thought this film wasn't really widely available as I was growing up, and I went to a community activist group that was screening it in Seattle as a kid, and I saw that scene and I realized, wow, they're in there with them. They think that a police raid is going to happen. They're getting their guns ready. They're taking blood types, and the filmmakers are there. And so they're making this film, and then Chairman Fred was basically assassinated. And they called my father right away. They were there with the film crew. They filmed the aftermath, and then it becomes sort of this technical, unraveling of how this was basically a political assassination. And they found out later the FBI was involved. They didn't know about COINTELPRO at the time. They were being targeted by the federal government. There was an FBI informant in the group that had sort of set Chairman Fred up. So.
All that got discovered after the making of this film, right? And also, as I understand it, I mean, the film had a certain, activist efficacy in that it was a factor in Hanrahan being indicted. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that it was. I mean, he was indicted, I think, for evidence, false evidence, and some other things. He was acquitted, but it pretty much sunk his career. He was aspiring, I think, to be mayor and had bigger political aspirations. That was over for him after this film, because it's very clearly laid out that he's lying, and that's kind of undeniable. And so that was always the thing that my grandparents were the most proud of this film. It got him indicted.
They should be. So, Jesse, thank you for coming to our virtual festival. And also, I want to remind people that today we're also showing your latest film, Pariah Dog, a wonderful documentary that you spent 3 years making. I want to encourage people to check that out and rate both films. Thank you again, Jesse.
Thanks for having me.